Every film's got a look. Every film has a way that the director and the production designer use the frame to help tell the story. The way the director of photography uses light to help tell the story. And in Hollywood films of different periods, there's different styles of looks that come into play. And An Affair to Remember is a classic example of the look of the 1950s Hollywood feature film. The amazing thing to me, the thing that makes it very interesting for me, is that Leo McCarey works within the format of Hollywood filmmaking in the 1950s and uses color, uses the frame, uses his staging to tell a very particular story. And one of the reasons I think this film has lasted as a classic is because the look of the film is so carefully crafted.
It has a kind of Fox look of the 50s. That's because of the cinemascope and color.
Otto Preminger said that the only thing CinemaScope would be good for would be snakes making love.
If you look at the very beginning of An Affair to Remember, you can see that Leo McCarey was a filmmaker who was very much used to using the Academy ratio, we call it 4:3 frame, of earlier films, of pre-widescreen. If you look at the beginning of An Affair to Remember, all the characters are dead center in the frame, the newscasters who are giving the news reports, even though they're shot in a widescreen format. It's almost as though the edges of the frame didn't exist for Leo McCarey in his staging.
McCarey's motto was always do it visually. And so I think he does a wonderful job with CinemaScope in terms of filling the frame with information and his placement of characters and how he utilizes them, especially some of the shipboard scenes.
McCarey had really come into prominence doing films for Laurel and Hardy. And he understood that comedy and drama were about the characters. They weren't about the architecture. And so that's how he chooses to draw you in to these people. He lets the actors have a tremendous amount of freedom within the frame. There are parts of this film that were improvised between Cary Grant and Deborah Kerr. He allows you to do that because he's got everything set up so that you're only focusing on them. Even though Leo McCarey really used sort of a tableau setup to do most of his scenes there, very flat setup, put his players generally on the same plane of movement in the frame. He knew how to use his location. He knew how to use his sets in creative ways to help tell the story. When you see Terry and Nikki first meet, well, they meet on board a ship. But Nikki is inside a hallway, a passageway, and there are windows that he and Terry interact through when she has his cigarette case. And there's a wall between them, a physical wall, a barrier between them actually being able to come together.
I might as well confess, I am a jewel thief.
I don't believe it.
I was returning it to the purser. I found it in the... No.
One of the things that's fascinating to me about this film is that Cary Grant really wanted to shoot this on a real ship at sea. He wanted everything to be on location. Leo McCarey did not want to do this. Leo McCarey wanted to make a studio film. Because they didn't try to go and shoot this on a ship, it has a very different look.
It's a dream film. It's a memory film. And so the fact that it's done in that kind of bright Technicolor, done in widescreen and done in studio with artificial backdrops is not a problem for most people.
There's no way you could have shot this movie and gotten the type of emotional response from an audience by shooting it on location in a real ship, because you wouldn't have had the layer of unreality that surrounds this movie. All of the exteriors of Cary Grant and Deborah Kerr on the ship are shot on a soundstage. And it's very evident when you're looking at the film that it's shot on a soundstage. This layer of unreality is very subtle. Most viewers won't notice it. Deborah Kerr's head shadow in one shot is very clearly on Cary Grant's shoulder. And then when you reverse the shot, they've moved the light so that her face is fully lit, so her shadow falls behind her. And this layer of unreality actually adds to that emotional intimacy that you see in a romance like this.
Well, that sort of brings us up to date. Now my life is an open book.
Oh, that's only one page.
Well, Leo McCarey was making sure that you were focused on the faces. It's one of the reasons he doesn't use the architecture of the ship, that he uses very subtle pastel colors in the background, so that you're looking at his two stars. You are falling in love with Deborah Kerr. You are falling in love with Cary Grant. And to do that, he focuses very much on their faces. You see the layer of unreality tremendously when they go and visit Cary Grant's grandmother. You see a location shot, and you look at the hard shadows that they cast on the sidewalk. And then when Cary Grant and Deborah Carr arrive at his grandmother's, if you look, they're casting 6, 8 shadows at a time. Well, they're on a soundstage. All the lights are set up from different directions to make sure their faces are beautifully lit. What you get is you get a scene that is still very intimate about the characters. It doesn't become about where the grandmother lives. It becomes about how the grandmother lives and how Deborah Carr is reacting emotionally to how the grandmother lives.
Oh, you have the most beautiful place here.
Thank you.
I think I could stay here forever.
Oh, no. You are too young for that, my dear. It is a good place to sit and remember. But you have still to create your memories.
Now, once they arrive back into New York, once they come back into the real world, you start having reality intrude. You have this one icon of reality, and that's the Empire State Building. The way Leo McCarey uses the Empire State Building and the way it had to be shot. I mean, you could have gotten a filmmaker who would have created a model of the Empire State Building. You could have done things where you did elaborate moves around it to sort of romanticize the Empire State Building. Leo McCarey doesn't do that. The Empire State Building is not an icon of something good. It is this large, gray monolith that stands up, and it keeps reappearing in this film, and it's almost like a tombstone in the way that it's used. And of course, the classic shot is when Deborah Carr pushes the glass door open, and as it swings out, you see the Empire State Building perfectly reflected in it. Well, this was a shot that was done on a studio soundstage. But Leo McCarey is careful that they make it look realistic, that it is not something that is done with a cheap special effect or anything like that. He wants that to be an icon of reality. He wants that to intrude on the bubble of the romance.
Goodbye, Ken.
Goodbye. Good luck.
Shows what a state I'm in. I thought the Empire State Building was this way, and of course it's that way.
An Affair to Remember is one of those classic American movies that's become part of the culture. It's a movie you can't imagine being made today.
Even, I think, audiences, our younger audiences today, we show it at school sometimes, and I think they're moved by the film, and that's the ultimate compliment.
This is a film that takes you into the unreality of falling in love, where the rest of the world disappears and the reality of the rest of the world disappears. And reality intrudes harshly for these characters. And then they have to find each other again outside of that bubble, that blush of the initial romance. And that's what this movie's about. And visually, Leo McCarey is able to use the tools at his command to create an unreal world for them to fall in love with, to let reality intrude visually, and to bring them together in a smaller, more human way. And this is done not just with the script, not just with the performances, but how Leo McCarey sets up his frame, the canvas on which he chooses to paint. And he goes from the grand to the simple. And that's one of the things that makes this film resonate with people.